rock and roll. Ha, ha, ha. I have to like hype myself up a little bit.
You are so loud in my AirPods right now.
I'm so sorry. Hello, everyone, and welcome to Smells Like Teen Angst podcast, because we're special now. I am Sarah, and I am here joined by my two lovely cohorts, per usual. Ladies, introduce yourselves.
Hi, I'm Jordan.
And I'm Keiki.
Yeah, we got to, people might just be hearing our voices for the first time. We got to make sure they know who's saying what.
I'm just going to say your names annoyingly after every sentence then, so they know who I'm talking to.
Thank you, Jordan. I appreciate that suggestion.
Okay, Sarah.
So we are diving into the Hunger Games series. If you heard our last podcast, I don't know if you're listening in order or not. We started with Twilight. We went on to Perfect Addiction, which is a fun Wattpad turned movie book. And now the Hunger Games, because we've got the new Hunger Games book coming out this fall. So why not dive back in to another fun old series that I only read in my 20s and watched the movies once.
Well, let's not call it dive back in, because this was a first for moi. I did not read The Hunger Games when they came out. I did, however, watch all the movies and was a fan. So I was down to hop into this series, and let me tell you, if I would have read this series first and then watched the movies, I might have been upset. Because this shit is D-A-R-K, dark.
Yeah.
I mean, that is my overall complaint, Keiki, about the books versus the movies of the Hunger Games, is that the tone of the movies does not match the tone of the books at all. And I think that the movies really played into like the love triangle, cutesy, wanted to capitalize on the Twilight situation and make it like a fun, fluffy, romantic thing. And these books are messed up as hell, man.
Absolutely. I feel like while this is a YA book series, it is a dystopian book series. It is very, very dark. This world is so fucked up. But for the movie, I think they just wanted to make it lighter. They wanted to make it for tweens.
Definitely. And the movies give us like such a large capital backstory that the books don't.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
I get it, but I really think if they kind of played to how dark this book was for me reading to this movie series, like would have been a whole different type of story.
Absolutely. So for just in case people are listening to this and don't watch or read The Hunger Games, it is set in like a dystopian America where the country had a huge civil war and we split off into factions basically. And there's 12 districts. There used to be 13. And every year there is a reaping where they take 2 people from every district and throw them into the Hunger Games where they slaughter each other as a reminder that the capital controls your entire world and your life and they could kill your children.
Yeah, not people, Sarah. Not people, children. They take 2 children.
Children.
Yeah, they keep you in line. They use fear, which is very real.
Yeah, and it is 12 to 18-year-olds that fight. And when rewatching the movie, I did see that there was a card in the beginning, which was something I did not recall. So when I read it in the book, I was like, oh, I didn't realize that it was only kids. But at least the movie did tell us it was kids.
Yeah. And I think it's so interesting, Keiki, that you did not read this book series. So I do want to hear from you a lot about like your experience. So when you first read in the beginning, just like the world in general, Katniss's world, like what did you think?
I just really thought it was a lot darker than anything I could have imagined. When reading this book, I realized, oh, this is like a dystopian, rundown America. People are trapped by electric fences and walls, Everyone is kind of told what they're supposed to do and how they're supposed to live. No one really gets by. People are starving. People are dying. And, you learn things like Katniss is entering her name multiple times for like grain and oil to feed her family. And that her dad died when she was really young. And, these things are all kind of like glazed over in the beginning of the movie. And just kind of coming from that place and getting that backstory on how Katniss became the teenager she is that goes into the Hunger Games was pretty crazy, because it gave me a character who wasn't as soft and like fragile girl as the movies kind of gave me, but someone who's been through a lot of hardship, who has been in survival mode since they were like a preteen.
That is one of my biggest takeaways reading it again, is that in reading it this time and being older and having a different perspective, is that Katniss is 100% in survival mode. And I think there's a lot to be lost switching from a first person perspective, which the books are in, to a third person perspective, right? Because you're missing her whole inner monologue. And I think in the movies, they make Katniss seem dumb as hell. They just make her seem really dumb and impulsive, and like you don't understand so much of her motivation. Where in the books, you're getting that internal monologue, and it really is just moment to moment survival. And she's been doing this for years.
I did not like this book the first time I read it. I thought it was slow. I didn't really care about anything that was going on. And then at the end of it, when they're like on the train headed home and it ends, I was like, well, do I care enough about these characters in this world to keep reading? And I did. I cared like just enough. And then I really enjoyed the next two books so much more than the first one. But rereading this now as an adult, like you said, Jordan, it is a whole other perspective that I don't think I understood or appreciated when I read this the first time.
Yeah, and I can get that too, because I think if these books came out when I was a teenager, like if I read this as a teen, I definitely would not have been like super into it. I would have been like, oh, I like happy things. Like this is really sad and dark. And like, I don't like where it's going. It seems like it might be a war book. Like that's what it seems like, to me.
Yeah.
And yeah, just in the first part of this book, I feel like I get so much insight into who Katniss is as a character that the movies just don't give me. Like her relationship with her mother, her relationship with Prim, like who she's become in these years since her dad died, who Gale is to her. A whole different world than what the movies gave me.
Absolutely. And I think like when I watched the movies, I thought that they do a decent job of giving you the surface level to the story. Like we get the gist, but we don't get the depth. And I really think they could have added 20 minutes because the movie's like just over 2 hours long. It's like 2 hours and 20 minutes or something like that. And they could have added 20 more minutes and given us a lot more because they kept trying to tell you the stories of her dad through like these weird flashbacks, right? Her mother's depression through weird flashbacks. They try to build this relationship with her and her sister with like calling her like little duck and always having to tuck in her shirt because her sister was always a little messy. But they never really fully went in on it. I think if they had just set up the world hard in the beginning, we could have seen her as a little girl and started with her father's death. We could have lived a little bit of her mother's depression. We could have seen who she had to become. And like, it would have taken 10 minutes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Another thing that I had to look it up while we were talking right now is what year the books came out. So the first one came out in 2008, which means I was like around, I just turned 20. And I think one of the reasons it didn't hit so hard when I read it the first time when they came out is one, I think I was just too close in age to Katniss. So like the gravity of someone literally taking a child and forcing a child to fight to the death didn't register the same for me now that I'm like in my early 30s, mid 30s. The other part about it is that I was definitely in dystopia fatigue at that point. Because if you think about it, I had already read The Uglies by Scott Westerfield. And then, oh my God, what's that book? They made the movie with Shailene Woodley.
Divergent.
Y'all know what I'm talking about. Yes, yeah, Divergent. And like, there were so many dystopian series that had about like terrible dystopian futures that came out between like 2000 to 2010. And I'm definitely blaming George Bush and the war in Iraq for this because we were definitely like in that mindset.
Absolutely.
So that by the time Hunger Games came around, I'm like, oh God, it's another dystopian future series. I don't know how much more of this I can take.
Yeah, I feel like I was much more like, I want a love story. Like I was so much more in that vein. Because these came out when I was like 25. And
Yeah.
You know, I was never a big reader growing up. Harry Potter's really got me into reading, and then, you know, Twilight, and then these, and like I started like Percy Jackson. And so I think at that point I was like, I just need something fun and light. And so I couldn't appreciate what this really was.
You picked the wrong series, Sarah.
I know this was not the series to read at the time. I was like, Gale and Katniss, that's all I want. Just give me Gale and Katniss. Peeta can go away. I still feel that way. You know, it just wasn't the book I was wanting. And I think that's probably all it was. And so now reading it now, I think it's great. I want to ask about casting, because this really put Jennifer Lawrence on the map. Like, yes, she won. Did she win the Oscar for Lovely Bones?
I think so, right?
I think she did.
Yes? One of us can Google this.
She was just nominated. I can't remember. It's not important. But she did that. And then like she auditioned for Twilight and all Divergent and all these like YA things and never got them. And then she got Hunger Games. So what did you guys think about the main character casting with Jennifer Lawrence, Josh Hutcherson, Liam Hemsworth, as well as like Woody Harrelson and Elizabeth Banks?
I honestly think that the casting on this movie was perfect. And I was thinking about it as I was reading it again. You know, I think because the first time I read it, I didn't really have like strong opinions on what the characters looked like. I just kind of rolled with it.
Sure.
Then they were announcing the casting for the movie. And I'm going to get back to my opinions on that because I have strong reactions to the way the public reacted. But reading it now and having seen the movie 9 bajillion times and knowing what they look like in the movie, I was like, you know what? The casting on this was really ridiculously well done.
Yeah, I agree. I definitely agree. I think the book does describe Gale as looking as if he could be related to Katniss.
That's just something Peeta says to be a dick. Joke's on you, Peeta, because most people date people who look like themselves.
Isn't that something Katniss says herself?
First of all, they do. I don't know if you've seen the Instagram, like siblings are dating, but it's on there. And no, you're right. She does. They both say it at some point because they say how the people from their region all look very similarly. And I will say there's a lot of precedence to the whole Katniss was not white thing. If we're going to go with a white Katniss, then yes, Jennifer Lawrence was perfect. That being said, was she white?
Yeah, I struggled with that. I was, it sounded like they could have been native, but I didn't want to, put my theory on it. I think it's just the way they described like their features a little bit and the area that they grow up in. I'm like, oh, so Native American, but I don't know.
Yeah, I never really thought about it because it is like it takes place in the Appalachia area.
Mm-hmm.
And she's just described as like what, dark hair, olive skin, gray eyes.
Yep.
And like that, it's very much like the Hermione thing, right? It's as nondescript as you can get.
Yeah.
For sure. And that's why when people ask me like, how did you see Hermione when you were a kid? I was like, well, I saw her like me because they didn't give me anything. I have curly, messy hair too.
Yeah.
I saw me.
Yeah. So I think it was just like the way authors at the time got away with not being specific and allowing readers to interject themselves into characters in an easier way with like.
Mm-hmm.
Yep, Sarah, 100%. The age of the self-insert.
Yeah, exactly. Like we talked about how Bella is one of like the easiest self-insert characters of all time. So I think that's what it is. I would have loved if she was like a native girl because it makes perfect sense with where it takes place. I just never thought about it, to be honest.
So let's get past the world building for sure. And kind of just talk about after the reaping things that took place and kind of went down. Because after the reaping, I think it was so quick in the book for me, or in the movie for me. Like, it really just seemed like she volunteered as tribute. They were on the train. They were out, bam, straight to the Capitol. But I think when we're on that train there and we're like getting introduced to all these characters, I think it really helped set up the juxtaposition of the world in my head. Like I was thinking like, imagine going from like the barrios of like Brazil, where you're living in like a shack with dirt floors to all of a sudden like on the nicest Japanese flying train bullet train you could ever get on with like the finest clothes and silks and food abound and servants abound. That's another thing the book talks about that the movie doesn't really talk about is that there's servants.
rewind before that, a thing that the books really nailed that, again, the movies don't because the movies are lighter, is the gravity of her leaving. Because all these people come to say goodbye to her basically because they're like, we're never going to see you again. You're going to die. And we're all really sad about it. And it really like nails the gravity of the situation that these whole towns, these communities are every year sending away a child that they'll know that they're never going to see again.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And how rough that is on people.
And the movie glosses over the strategy that takes place from day one. Like the movie makes, while Haymitch is absolutely a drunk, he is smart and he knows to play the game. Because when Katniss is standing on that stage, and they cut this from the movie, and I think it was stupid, is he makes a scene when she's emotional. Because if she's emotional, she is weak.
Mm-hmm.
And so he pulls focus, falling all over Effie, and no one's paying attention to her anymore. No one sees her tears. No one sees her fear. And that's where the strategy starts. And in the movie, they make the strategy start like they gloss over the gravity, they gloss over the slaves, Keiki, that you were getting into, and instead they make it like, oh well, he's just a drunkard. He doesn't care about them. Peeta's gonna go train on his own. She's gonna train on her own. Cool, but there's so much more strategy that goes into it.
Yeah, just on the train alone.
And they play his alcoholism like for laughs in the movie. When in the book, again, they get into like he's an alcoholic because every year he gets these 2 kids that he's got to mentor and try and help win this game. And he knows that they're not going to win more than likely. And so he watches these kids every year, 2 kids that he knows are going to die. I'm sorry, you would drink yourself to a stupor every day if that was your life too.
Exactly. That would be the worst part of the year every time it came around,
Mm-hmm.
I also think that like there was a moment on the train where he kind of like squabbles a little bit with Peeta, and I feel like he was like strength checking him.
Mm-hmm.
I was like, he was like, he hit him to see if he could take a hit,
Absolutely.
like he started that fight to kind of see what these kids were shaping up to be. Like, do I waste my time and energy?
Yeah, 100%.
Because very much so, he's probably wasted his energy so many times. When you think of the age Haymitch is, he won like 20 something odd years before. Can you imagine watching a set of children die for 20 years in a row? Like that would torment you.
On top of his own PTSD from having won.
Exactly.
So you got to think about whatever Haymitch went through when he was in the arena, however many kills he racked up in the arena or people he watched die, which like that alone would be enough. And then 40 other kids on top of that.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then also that internal monologue too from Katniss that we don't get is that Katniss knows going into this that only one person wins. So she's like, I can't be nice to this Peeta kid because I'm going to have to kill him if I want to come back home.
Yeah.
It's dog eat dog. Like that's just what it is.
Yeah.
And that's the gravity of it going into this game. Like we're all going to die.
Yeah. And what could have helped on this train? Because we spend literally an hour in this movie setting up the Capitol, like a whole hour. Like it's so much time. When it comes to the Voxes, like that's an extra layer that I'm like, why aren't they not in there? How do we not show that these people are kidnapped and tortured and their tongues are cut out? Like the gravity of who the Capitol is and what they do is so squandered and squashed. And I'm just like, why? This was like something so simple. It just doesn't make sense how something so simple. There were so many little simple things they could have done to show the gravity of this world, and they don't.
Especially because the movie has some goofy flashbacks. Like, the movie has goofy flashbacks about her dad and her mom's depression. So they could have had an Avox flashback.
Absolutely. And they also could have, like, let us know that there is an energy of hatred around the Capitol. Because we learned that when... Katniss is hunting with Gale, that Gale talks a lot of smack about the Capitol. And Katniss used to do the same. And she only pulled back because she doesn't want Prim to talk like that.
Yeah.
Which also is another eye-opening let into who she is as a person, because she feels like she parents her sister. She's setting an example.
Yeah. It's interesting what the movie found to be the important things versus the book. Because they are not what I would have considered the important things. Like the creatures of this world as well are horrifying. Like they explain the Mockingjay and they don't really explain it in the movie.
Yeah. And I mean, let's talk about that change. There is a black market that is mentioned in the book, and we see it shortly in the movies, and that's where Katniss comes across this pin. But in reality, in the book, she gets this pin from the mayor's daughter. It's a gift from her, and she's giving it to her as a symbol because of what it means, like what the Mockingjay means. It is something that the Capitol had created to spy on their people, a bird that tells on you. And the people used it against the Capitol because they were like, well, let's just talk about random things and none of the information you'll ever get is correct. And now they're just like these crazy mutts that hang around like pigeons, just roaming the world and have no job or use anymore.
Those are the important things that the book has that the movie doesn't, is that Gale is out here going 13-12 all day long.
Yes.
The mayor's own daughter gives Katniss' pin. Like, if the mayor's daughter is aware of this pin and what it means, and clearly she is, and she asks Katniss, can you wear this in the game? It's showing that there is already dissent and that people are happy and trying to find, or people are unhappy and trying to find their ways to voice that. So when things that happen later on in the series happen, you realize this didn't happen in a bottle. It didn't happen just because of Katniss. This was something that was brewing for a while, and she was just able to kind of stoke that fire.
Without even knowing. Yeah.
It's set up so much where you realize she's being used. She is being used as a symbol. They look at her and they go, this is our opportunity. We finally have the strength and the courage on our side.
Yeah.
Use it for what we can.
I think the movies give her way more credit as a revolutionary when really she was just a girl who got caught up. She was in survival mode.
Yes.
Exactly.
But she was the exact type of person who could benefit from it because she is living the darkest of this dark world. She is someone who lost her father because he had to work in the mines. She is someone who had to parent her sibling. She is out here teaching herself how to hunt just so people can eat in her family. She is the one entering her name in this game multiple times just so she has grain and oil for her family. Like, she's picking up the slack where no one else can.
Yeah.
So she is someone who's like fearful of what the Capitol could do, but also understands the game that you have to play to survive in this world.
Absolutely. And let's talk about the people of the Capitol, because that's something I think that the movie also got really wrong. And I don't mean this to become like a shit on the movie, talk about the books podcast. But when reading about it, I was like, they all needed to look like Angelina Jolie in Maleficent. Like, they all needed to look like they had surgery done. They needed to look so gaunt, and their clothing needed to look wild and alien and futuristic. And it's like, they all need to look like Stanley Tucci, because his character I thought was perfect.
I love Stanley Tucci and everything. He can do no wrong. He is my king. Tucci gang for life. And he was absolutely perfect in this movie.
So perfect. Like, how do you have Elizabeth Banks looking so perfect? Like, everyone needed to look like that, like the two of them. And the fact that no one in that world did, it just looked like really bad Forever 21 walking around. I'm like, this doesn't show you anything other than these people just like really like watching a Coliseum game.
They didn't spend enough money on the extras at all, but I will say the one who I really loved, and he gave this hilarious interview about it, was the game master in the movie, because he has that crazy beard.
Yes.
And he said that like his life was miserable because that was his actual facial hair that they were cutting that way. And he would like try to go to Starbucks on days when he wasn't filming, and they'd be like, what the fuck is wrong with this guy? And he couldn't say, I'm in the Hunger Games movie, that's why my beard is like this. So he just had to walk around with this dumb beard.
That's so funny. I feel like he could have said that he was working like a con or like a Ren fair, that he was just like, you know, I don't know. But those are things that I actually really appreciate from the movie that we don't get in the book. So it's the game master with President Snow. We're introduced to President Snow in this movie. And those conversations are so eerie because Donald Sutherland is just incredible in this part. And I love the stuff with Stanley Tucci setting up the world as well, because like as they're coming over, he shows what a spectacle it is, right? So it's very much almost like the pre-Oscars, you know, when everyone's like talking about everyone showing up. We're going to talk about everyone's coming here. Let's talk about the bios of everybody and like why they're amazing and why we should be so excited about this Hunger Games and making it normal and not like a battle to the death of children.
Mhm.
It very much felt like the Olympics or like an Olympics pregame, and you're just like, yeah, they're going to run track really well. And you have to remember, no, they're not going to run track. They're going to kill each other.
Yes.
Exactly. So I loved that in the movie. I think those were great additional moments. And like, especially, you know, at the end when Katniss and Peeta do the whole thing with the berries, and then President Snow has a conversation with the game master, and you're like, well, he doesn't have a job. That man is dead. You know? So it shows more gravity of who he is as a character, which I don't think we get introduced to him until the second book. So I like that they brought him in. I like the way they built up this weird Olympics world, like you said, Jordan. I think that was necessary for the movie to show the spectacle that all of this is.
Absolutely agreed. That's what I'm saying. There are certain changes that were great by switching it to third person, but then we lost a lot of other things that were not so great.
Yeah. And the talk of the world is where we lost things, at least in this first part for me. Like, we are still talking about the part 1 of the book. This book is split into 3 parts. But yeah, I think just like distinctly talking with you guys and realizing that we're all in this same agreement that like we left some things out that really would have changed the tone of this whole situation.
Absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
Even the relationship with Effie, you know, that's another big part. Effie doesn't really want, at least from my opinion in reading the book, like to be the District 12 person.
Mm-mm.
It's just kind of like you get assigned a district and you have to prove yourself, and then you can get moved up to like a better district, you know?
Yeah.
And for her, she's just like, well, I can't prove myself because like Haymitch doesn't help me. And like, instead I'm just like over here making up stories about how you, like, I wrote down Effie saying, I'm just telling people about how you survived the barbarism of your district. And I was like, she's literally saying that District 12, like, barbarism is like the absence of any culture, you know, like any type of specific civilization. She's saying like they come from nothing, you know?
Yeah.
Like, and these poor peasants who struggle to eat. Like, that's how she sees them. And I think until I read this book, I didn't realize that it was that bad for them either.
That's fair.
I think that Effie and Haymitch are set up as foils of each other, because I think Haymitch is very much steeped in the reality of what they're doing, which is sending children off to kill each other.
Mm-hmm.
And Effie is very much caught up in the, like, it's just a job, and like not really processing what she's doing. And I think they're very much set up to be foils of each other, where Haymitch is taking it incredibly seriously, like to a painstaking way, and Effie is not. But then they're both playing the opposite card, where Effie is like, you guys have to take this seriously because I want to go to a better district. And Haymitch is kind of like, whatever, man, I'm just going to have another beer because this sucks.
Yeah, like Effie very much is still brainwashed by the Capitol and by like how this is an honor and everyone should feel honored to be a part of it and chosen.
Mm-hmm.
You know, like that's where she's at. I'm just like, do people from the Capitol get reaped? No, right? It's just 1 through 12.
No, because the capital is just the capital of the government, and it's 1 through 12. But the thing is, the districts 1 and 2 are very rich because they are near the capital.
Yes, and they also have like kids that they train to do this.
That's their job.
Professionals.
Mm-hmm. I also really loved Lenny Kravitz as Cinna. I thought that he...
Oh my God. My heart gets so warm every time I think about it.
I think he embodied that character really well because he is her friend, her confidant in this entire thing. And, you know, you learn more later about why he is very much into her as a person. And I think the costuming that they did was phenomenal.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
When they talked girl on fire, when reading it, I honestly couldn't picture it. And then I saw it in the movie and I was like, wow.
Yeah, the movie hella got that right. Like, the fire that Cinna does is amazing. Cinna as a character in general is amazing. I did do like some research into that because when watching the movie, I just thought like Lenny Kravitz was like so gentle and loving to her. And then I figured out that, you know, him, Jennifer Lawrence and Zoe Kravitz have been friends since childhood. So like he probably knew her prior to that movie. Mm-hmm. And that's why he's like really good with her. Like in the movie, I'm just like, wow, I just feel like the love here. Mm-hmm. Like this is like a father talking to their kid, like go out and kill it. I'm proud of you type of moments, you know?
Yeah. Things that happen now, like, cause that are additions to the movie. Like, we get to learn a lot more about the other district characters. We get to see them fight. We get to see, you know, all the conversations that they have already with Peeta and Katniss about show your strength. Everyone's laughing at you. Part of me really appreciates it. And then part of me also thinks it was so unnecessary.
Yes and no, because I do think they kind of rush like the preparation to go into the arena in the book. And so I kind of like they took more time in the movie and that you get to know the other characters better. But I do think there are weird changes or like changes that, like you said, how they have the strategy of like, oh, we're going to practice together. But then in the movie, they're like, oh, no, we're going to practice separately the whole time. And I think that them practicing together and then not practicing together in the book sets up a very important relationship dynamic between Katniss and Peeta.
Mhm.
Absolutely. But then, of course, they nail that moment of her trying to like shoot her arrows to show him how good she is, and she messes up because the arrows are weird. And then she's like, "Thank you for your time." When she nails the pig apple, I'm like, "Yes,
Yeah.
thank you for that." You can't remove that. It's such a pivotal moment.
Yes.
And then they get real deep into things. So, as far as everything else in the Capitol, I don't have anything else to talk about with that. Do you guys? Should we move into the Hunger Games?
Well, I mean, before we get into the games, I just want to talk about there is a moment where, you know, during this whole primp and prep situation, you know, everyone is leaning into their role and listening to Haymitch and listening to Cinna and listening to Effie and just trying to do what's best for everyone.
Mm-hmm.
And there's some parallels that are in the book that are in the movie, like them holding hands. It was Cinna's idea in the book. In the movie, it's Peeta's idea. And then Peeta, you know, interviewing away from Katniss towards the end, you know, in the book, because we get Katniss's internal monologue, she is very much like, I thought we were freaking homies, but if you want to break this up, then whatever, break it up. Like, I'm glad you want to like go talk to someone to plan out how to kill me since we're getting closer to the games. And I think the movie kind of, I don't know, rushes through how long that they're actually like staying in this training camp and learning about how to do things in the game. Like, they don't just get to the Capitol and get thrown into the games. They actually spend some time in this training camp and they learn some type of skills, like how to maybe start a fire. Like, here are some weapons you can play with, you know? There's an opportunity they give them so they could make this reality show type of situation more interesting.
Agreed.
And then it all kind of settles down in this like battle royale.
You know what part of the movie that I thought was a perfect translation? Peeta's interview with Stanley Tucci.
Yeah.
She's talking about how, like, in the book, how effortless he is with the crowd and how he has them laughing and how Stanley Tucci really likes him and, like, how Peeta's so likable and she wishes that it was that easy for her. And in the movie, I think Josh Hutcherson and Stanley Tucci totally nail it when they're, like, smelling each other and, like, getting all close and buddy-buddy and laughing. And it was just, like, a perfect, like, script-to-screen translation.
The whole do I smell like roses to you type of situation. Definitely exactly like the book to movie translation perfectly. But again, where I fell short and now reading the books is that without Katniss's internal monologue, you never realize she's out of the love loop. She's out of this whole plan and situation that's happening. And she really is going into this with a big chunk of fear in her. Like, it's life or death.
Yeah, I mean, I don't agree with that. I think she played that really well in the movie, that because she still chokes him out when he says, "I was in love with the girl and she's here." And she's like, "What the fuck is this? This was not, I was never told about this. What are you playing at? Like, this is stupid." Like, that happens in the movie. The whole time you can tell she's scared. And then especially when she's talking to Cinna in that last 30 seconds and you have that pressurized countdown and her getting in the tube, that face she makes as she disappears, that is pure terror.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. Like, what was my specific case? When they do the strength test, you know, in front of everyone to get rated, and she shoots the apple out of the pig's mouth, she then leaves and goes back to their lodging and has a full-on breakdown and panic attack. Like, she is so scared about what's going to happen to her for behaving that way. Like, Are they going to pick her sibling from the district and cut her tongue out and turn her into an Avox for behaving that way? Like, she lost her temper and she's really afraid of capital punishment. And not seeing that in the movie, it didn't show me how afraid of the capital everyone really is, or how afraid of the capital she really is, you know?
Sure. Yeah, I can for that moment, absolutely, I agree with that. Because in the movie, they make it more of a joke.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So this is the thing that I can't figure out, and I don't know if it's because it's supposed to be ambiguous or if I'm just not smart. Did Peeta tell Haymitch that he was in love with Katniss as an angle? Or did he tell it genuinely and Haymitch was like, we're going to work it as an angle then? Like, was Haymitch in on this before he said this? And it's a thing that's kind of bothered me the whole time because everyone is playing a game and everyone is playing an angle in the Hunger Games. And so for me, I could never figure out, like, did Peeta tell Haymitch this genuinely, like in a moment of like genuine confession? Or was he trying to figure out angles with Haymitch? Or like, did he say it and Haymitch was like, man, we got to play this up. Like, this is a thing that you're dealing with and we're going to use it because it's good.
I think it's completely ambiguous. They never explain it in the book or in the movie. But in my head, here's how it goes. They're sitting there talking strategy because he thinks it's better. Because, like, they can't bond too much, otherwise he can't kill her, blah, blah, blah. And then he's like, man, it just, like, I think it's like an off-the-cuff statement, right? It's like, oh, man, I just wish it wasn't her because I've been in love with her since I was a kid. And then Haymitch is like, excuse me?
Mm-hmm.
Let's go with it. Like, and then Haymitch is like, oh, this is it. I don't think, not that Peeta's dumb, but I don't think he is a strategist to think that that would be an angle. I think it was just a moment that he said something to Haymitch about, man, I wish this wasn't the girl here because I've loved her since I was a kid. Yeah. And Haymitch ran with it.
That's what I think too. I really think that Haymitch is the manipulator here.
Oh, for sure.
I think that he's separating them because he needs to see, he's like, you know, Peeta's proving himself likable. What can I use from this kid? You know, and Katniss is being this person. So what can we do to like make her stand out?
And he gives him that advice of do not go for anything, run to the woods and find water. And of course, Katniss ain't gonna listen because she doesn't listen to nobody. So let's dive in to the actual Hunger Games, which I actually think the movie did a pretty decent job overall. I love the addition of Stanley Tucci when we get to the Tracker Jackers, right? And the book explains who they are through Katniss, but obviously we can't do that for the movie. And I love the play-by-play, right? Like we're watching a sports game of like, these are who they are, blah, blah, blah. I think that was the perfect way to explain these horrifying creatures.
Yes, I think the addition of Stanley Tucci's commentary as if you were watching the games as like a Capitol resident or a resident of one of the districts made all the difference because it made things make so much more sense. And again, it expands the world that they built on because we're seeing everything from Katniss's point of view. So it gives you scope of like the Capitol is treating this like it's the Olympics or like it's a fun thing or a reality TV show. And everyone else is watching this because they're absolutely terrified and forced to remind them it could be you or your kid next.
Exactly. It's like the whole premise is terrifying. Getting Peeta together with the careers, you know, all of that happens. And the way all that goes down with the Tracker Jackers and like her being followed and the fox face girl. I don't ever know her name. I will always forever call her fox face girl. My biggest issue with this whole section is the relationship between Katniss and Rue. The book is so beautiful. You know, she sees her as her little sister. She's taking care of her. We see how much they've bonded and fall in love with each other as people. And then in the movie, they try to throw in little pieces of Rue, like when they were training in the Capitol and they having little moments. And then, you know, the whole Tracker Jacker moment happens. But we don't get enough of them together for when the big penultimate moment of Rue's death happens for me to care.
I don't agree with that at all. I think that the portion of the Hunger Games was rushed. And I think that there are a lot of things that they didn't show on screen just because there were actually quite a few days where all Katniss is doing is foraging and hunting.
Yeah.
And like that's honestly kind of boring, and I understand why they don't want to show that on screen, but I think they needed to do like a time lapse or something so you kind of get the breadth of time. And I think that's where they mess up with her and Rue's relationship, because her and Rue spend multiple days together hunting and foraging, but you don't get that in the movie.
Yeah, it seems like that whole relationship is in 24 hours, and you're like, okay.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. But I think part of my bitterness comes from really rooting for movie Rue, just because if you were around when the movie was released, casting and released, and they said that it was Amanda Stanberg, and like, I can't even remember what Amanda Stanberg had been in before this, but she had been in other movies, and they said it was her, and the internet lost their godforsaken minds, and they tried to say that this was blackwashing, and this, that, and the other, and that casting Rue didn't look anything like Amanda Stanberg, and it was just diversity for diversity's sake, and that literally people were like, her being black makes her less relatable, and like I'm less empathetic towards her now, which, my God, you're telling on yourself if that's your opinion. And I'm like, Amanda Stanberg, first of all, is just an adorable little girl, and I would protect her at all costs, the same way that Katniss was. And secondly, in the books, they literally say she's got like dark skin and kinky hair.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
they basically call her a little black Rue girl.
I was just going to say, I'm sorry, but like the way she's described in the book, that's a black child.
Yes, and
Yeah.
they say she like comes from a district that's really good at farming and she loves to sing. They basically made her like a black slave stereotype.
Yeah.
Yeah, literally it says in the book she is described as having satiny brown skin and thick dark hair with golden eyes. That is a black child. Like, I always pictured her black. I pictured not Kato, her counterpart as black as well.
Thresh.
Yeah,
Thresh.
It was also the names. I don't know, like Thresh and Rue just made me think like black or Indian people. Like,
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm looking up Thresh's description. Hold on. He is described as monstrously tall. We gotta love a very descriptive, and built like an ox. And if you want to get racist, that was a term very much used for black men during slavery.
mm-hmm.
Yep.
So if you want to get racist, that's not what I meant.
If you want to get racist. But like, if you want to talk about it in a racial aspect, like
There it is. Thank you.
That's the derivative. If we want to bring up race, that is the derivative. You know, it does come from a racially fueled term of how we described slaves in the past.
Exactly. That's just, I didn't know that happened. That's so silly because they are so obviously black characters.
It was such a huge controversy.
So dumb. People are so dumb. I do like in the movie that for a second you think they might change it and save her.
Oh yeah, right. They have that moment where they fake you out. And I remember sitting in the theater and going, huh? And then, oh no.
And then boom. Like, that's not what happened. That's my biggest issue. I agree with you, Jordan. I think it is the time issue because like you said, in the books, they spend so much time foraging and bonding. And then the movie, it just feels like 24 hours and then she dies. And I'm like, okay, bye.
Yeah.
Well, in the books, I feel like the Hunger Games took like 2 weeks in the books. And in the movie, it seems like 4 days.
Yeah.
Right.
And the movies, everything's very rushed.
Because it may even be longer than 2 weeks because we'll get there later. But like Peeta and Katniss stay in that cave for a hell of a long time.
Hell of a long time. That's where I was headed next, unless anyone's got something else to talk about.
No, but before we get into that, I did want to mention that during the training before, they're describing the food that they feed them at the training center. And Peeta was telling Katniss about how breads are made in different districts and what they eat. And when Rue does pass and Katniss gives this great tribute to her and, you know, basically gives her a funeral, which in the Hunger Games, when you die, they send in a plane that just snatches your body off the playing field and carries you away. And Katniss didn't allow that to happen. You know, she braided flowers into this girl's hair and fixed her in a way that made it look like she was sleeping. You know, she did something beautiful and then threw up that district symbol before she walked away, you know?
It was such a huge act of defiance, like a gigantic act of defiance.
And that district sent her bread.
Yeah. One thing that I don't, after reading the book this time, I just assumed that like everyone saw that, right? Like everybody saw her give Rue this funeral and like put her hands up to the screen and blah, blah, blah as a kid. And they kind of play it that way in the movie. But then reading it again this time, she says how like they don't want to broadcast anything that might be seen as defiance. They don't want to broadcast anything that might be like go against what the Capitol says. So it kind of felt like, well, maybe her district never saw that. They were just grateful that she did take time to hunt and forage with her, because that would have been shown too. And either way, I think it's just this really beautiful moment of defiance, like you said, where hey, they send her bread, like, and it's another poor district, so who knows how much money that cost them, but they're still like, we're gonna do something for Katniss.
Exactly. And you know, the book and the movies talk about how like the further the game gets along, the more expensive things are to get.
Yeah.
You know, so medicine on day 1 might be millions of dollars on day 10, you know? Like, it's crazy and it makes sense.
Oh, something else I want to talk about, because, you know, Rue and her have the idea to like sneak and get all of the career stuff. And that's when Katniss goes freaking deaf. I thought the movie did that really well, because they played that like piercing noise that you get when you listen to concerts, really, you know, without earplugs and stuff. And I was like, oh, they did such a good job of like involving the audience and making them feel how Katniss felt in that moment.
You also get in the books, you get the taste of like of what the game masters are doing, because they have that fire and Katniss is like, where the hell did this fire come from? And she's like, it's got to be the game masters. It must be getting boring. They're doing something to hurt us somewhere or to like make it more interesting.
Yeah, because she was hiding up in the trees. And so when they make the announcement that 2 people from the same district could win, she runs hunting for Peeta. And I love when she finds him in the movie and he just like opens his eyes. It's just like this eyeball sticking out of this painted body that looks like he's a log.
Yeah. I mean, I like the way it's described in the book too, because she, like, I was like, how would she find him? You know, and she had heard from Rue that, oh, I think he's down by the water. And she was like, you know, water, survival. He has to be near a body of water, probably, if he's living. And she tracks him by like blood and footsteps, you know? She's like, I see someone haphazardly try to smear blood away from somewhere. And I'm like, he's got to be somewhere around here. And like, we didn't see that in the movie. We just see her like searching and calling. And then she finds him on the ground, perfectly camouflaged, like trips over him.
Basically trips over him.
I just love his excuse for knowing how to camouflage so well when he's like, I did the cakes.
I mean, those must have been some nice cakes, because who's buying those cakes? I need to know.
Exactly. The Capitol Guards.
Who's got money for a cake?
And then, like you said, Jordan, they go hide in this cave forever because Peeta is dying. And this is one of the things that they took out of the Rue-Katniss relationship, where Rue taught her how to use herbs and plants and things to heal.
Yeah, Katniss is like, I know a little bit because that's what my mom does, but like I don't have a relationship with my mom. I didn't really pay attention to her. And Rue shows her the different plants that are around and like forages with her for them. That's what they trade. That's why they're like useful to each other.
Exactly.
And like what berries not to eat, which is important later. And so, like, the fact that Katniss is just, like, Peeta gets healed so fast.
Well,
like, Katniss is, like...
And that's, again, I don't want to shit on the movie because I really like this movie. But I will say that in the book, they describe, like, his injuries so gnarly. Like, I get kind of squeamish around, like, blood and injuries. And this was one where I was like, I don't want to read about this.
Yeah.
Because they're, like, basically, his leg is almost cut off. It's got pus coming out of it. It's hella infected. Like, she can see his veins. The infection is traveling through his blood. She's like, it's going to reach his heart soon. Mm-hmm. It's so messed up. And in the movie, it's like a scratch.
Yeah, it's just like a barely there injury. And I'm like, and I feel like they made that choice because they cut out everything about her learning how to heal with plants. Because then they would have to figure out how to get to the kiss really fast, and so that they could get the medicine really fast. And, you know, and so instead they were just like, here's some soup. Hey, here comes the medicine, because she decides to like give in. You know, they had to go around other ways that if they had just given 5 more minutes to this one relationship, we would have it.
Yeah, and it would also have shown how she really played the love story game.
Mm-hmm.
So, when we get to the end of this book and they're going home, it's like a shock to Peeta that Katniss doesn't actually like feel the way he feels.
No.
Her. And that's because when Katniss got there and she wanted something to help Peeta, Haymitch sends this little parachute and it's some broth, it's some soup. And he's like, one kiss equals broth, So she's like, if I play this up, maybe I'll get some medicine. So she really just dives into this love story. She's like, I'm going to baby him and I'm going to kiss and hug him and act like how my parents acted with each other because they loved each other.
I love the flashes to Gale.
It's so funny because she's like, I have no interest in this man. I have no interest in Gale. I have no interest in no man. I don't know how couples act. I'ma just fucking do my best and get this man some medicine.
Exactly. She's so adamant from the beginning that she never wants to get married and never wants to have children, because why would you ever bring people like that into this world? And this whole thing, like, I love that you like, and I don't know how you would have done it in the movie, but in the book, I love her whole inner monologue of playing the game, like you were saying, Keiki, of her figuring out what to do, what to say, how to play it up. And I can hear Haymitch's voice in my head and doing what needs to be done in order to get both of us home. Because at this point, two of them could win as long as they survive. And so now her goal as a survivor is to figure out how to get both of them home. The end.
And this is a thing that I was just thinking about as we were talking, is that all of this, some of the things that we miss in the movie are not in service to what eventually becomes this love triangle, because she is so in survival mode. Like in the movie, it always seems like, oh, Gale could be an interest to her and blah, blah, blah. Like they flirt back and forth. And I think in the book, she is so oblivious to the flirting because she's just in survival mode.
Yeah.
And she's always like, I think that she did have feelings for Gale. I just think that she never even considered it because she's like, no, I would never get married to somebody. I would never have kids. Why would I do that? We live in the Hunger Games. We live under the Capitol. There's no way I would have a kid and do this to them. And so for her, like, pursuing a romantic relationship was never even a thought. And I think that's kind of why she's like, oh, I was never interested in Gale, and I'm not interested in Peeta either, because, like, I'm not interested in anybody. I just want more grain.
Yeah, and it wasn't until she has this entire fake relationship with Peeta that she even considers, she's like, I wonder how Gale feels about this. And like, oh, does that mean I have feelings for Gale? Like she starts questioning everything because of this fake relationship.
Yes. And this is like, and I mean, I feel like we all have that awakening as teens where we're like, I like this person. I care about this person. I might like them more than a friend,
Mm-hmm. Because she's 16 in this, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So like, she's very, not sheltered isn't the right word, but like love is not on her mind even as a teenager. She's not allowed.
No.
So the Peeta's reaction later when they get home is he's just so flabbergasted. And she's like, bro, why are you surprised? I think that's so funny. She's like, I didn't even know who you were. You think I fell in love with you in like 2 days? Like doesn't even make sense.
Trying to get us home.
Yeah, I'm trying to get us home. And so, they get forced to go because they're like, there's a package that everyone needs, blah, blah, blah. Gotta go to the fucking cornucopia. And this is another...
Gotta have Thanksgiving.
Yeah, the Thanksgiving. And this is another change that I was like, why? Let's make this scary AF, man. Like the hounds, I'm calling them hellhounds, right?
Mm-hmm.
Coming for everybody. In the books are supposed to look like the dead tributes.
Oh,
that idea is terrifying. And it's done by it's not like their faces are transposed by any means. Like there's no face off happening, but it's just like they're coloring their eyes. And I'm like, why did we not do that? Why did we just get basic creepy dogs? Not even creepy.
Because I think I will say when I read it in the books, I was like, oh God, the first time I was like, oh, this is so dumb. And I think it's just because, again, I was like dystopian booked out and very like judgmental. And I will say at the time, I do not think CGI was in a place where this really would have like worked to the benefit of the filmmakers.
That's very true.
Several years later, and like very removed from the opinions I had then, and reading this with fresh eyes, I'm like, this is scary as hell. This is some serious messed up psychological warfare.
Yeah.
And I do think now our technology is in a much better place where it could have happened, and it really could have been just like,
Yeah.
it's so scary. The souls of these children that you killed are now on these dogs, and these dogs are going to try to kill you. Good God.
Exactly. And just the message of that in general. It's like, even if you didn't kill some of those people, you're now forced to survive by either killing them in a version of them, like, you know, seeing their faces on these dogs. So it's like, just because you made it to the end, what if you're someone who made it to the end by like not killing anyone, like PETA, and then all of a sudden you got to kill a dog that looks like some of the people who are around you?
Like, I could give it the CGI excuse if they needed the dogs' faces to look like the people, but that's not how it's described. It's literally like, you couldn't have given me a blonde dog with blue eyes. That's
And
it.
honestly, you could have had voiceover from Caesar Fleckman helping you sell this story at that point.
Yeah, and you could have literally just closed up on one of them, on the blonde one, on whatever, what's her name, Glimmer?
Yeah.
You know, because she was the blonde one, so this dog could have been blonde. You close up on the dog's eyes, and they're her eyes. Like, that's all you needed.
Oh, for sure. I think that's a good point.
I would give them the pass if the dogs were supposed to have their faces. Like some weird, like out of that new Evil Dead movie, you know, where they're just like one giant creepy spider.
Yeah.
Like, if that's what they needed to look like, I would give them the CGI pass. But that's not what it was supposed to be. So I just thought it was like a really weird choice to take these horrifying creatures, because all the creatures in this world are horrifying, and just turn them into basic they just look like mastiffs to me. Like, they weren't even scary. But then the whole thing with Kato at the end, like in the book, he is suffering for days before.
For hours. It's so long, and you don't get that in the movie at all. It is so long.
Before Katniss puts him out of his misery.
Which again, psychological warfare for Katniss and PETA. And like, I think the movies really gloss over how much PTSD the winners really fucking have.
Yeah.
Because even if you're like PETA and you made it through without actually killing someone, you still listen to Kato getting mauled by hellhounds for God knows how many hours.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I understand why for the movie they did it faster. It makes sense. I get they had to get out of there. They had to get to the 11th hour moment. But like in the book, it's just so it's just so awful.
That is the overall point.
Yeah, exactly.
The books are just terrifying, you know?
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
And the movies built this world where we can like kind of fall in love with the characters and kind of get to know and love Katniss, and almost as if we're like capital participants. We're so outside of it.
Yeah.
But reading the book,
that's a good way to describe it.
It comes from, you know, Katniss's first person experience, and we feel like we're right along there with her, and we're like, whoa, this is terrifying. Whoa, this is messed up. Like,
yeah,
how are they doing this to you? This isn't cool. Like, that's something that we're just experiencing for the first time in the book. And then the movie kind of lets us be outside of it.
The movie keeps it so light and entertaining, and the books put you in it. And I think when people wonder why millennials are like so anti-capitalist or so anti-government, and I'm like, all of us read the fucking Hunger Games when we were 19.
Right? We can't grow up on Harry Potter, the Hunger Games, and Divergent and not be who we are.
Right. And don't leave out Uglies, because I Will Die on the Hill. That series was great. I'm like, oh, that shit.
That's another series. That's a series I never read. So it's on my list because I think it's getting like a TV show or something.
I think it's getting something. I was up Scott Westerfield's butt when I was a teenager, but that's a story for a different podcast.
So like in the end, like we have the iconic moment of her calling the Capitol's bluff when they're like, just kidding, you have to only have one winner, and she's like, you can go fuck yourselves, you get no winner. And they're like, no, just kidding, we put that rule back, here's our winners.
But that's the thing, in the movie they make it seem like it's really, she's conniving and she's learned how to play the game, and blah, blah, blah. And in the book, she's still kind of going back and forth about it. And it is kind of an FU to the Capitol, but she's more so torn about, I don't want to kill Peeta. Peeta doesn't want to kill me. Let's just both die then. And like, that screws the Capitol, and that's a good side effect. But really, I just don't want to kill this kid.
Yeah.
And I also don't, like, I don't want him to kill me, so let's just go together.
And he's like down, which I think is so crazy.
Because he actually loved her, which is like so sad because she was just playing the game.
I don't think it's sad.
He was really there for the Romeo and Juliet of it all.
Like, I have no empathy for Peeta because I'm just like, you're so dumb, bro. Like, you're so dumb.
Yeah, no, he's stupid for that, for sure. Like, come on, this is life. This is war, man. We're in a war. Like, what do you mean we fell in love? Like, we didn't fall in love. We're just trying to get out of here.
Yeah, exactly. It's like, bro, like, what were you even thinking? And then, they have their like post-war breakdowns interviews, and they get on the train and they head back home, and it's just like they gotta keep up this facade, this love story for how long? Is it forever? And it's
well, this is a thing that they gloss over in the movie that I completely forgotten about until I read it this time. And I'm like, oh my god, it's so fucked up. So they don't immediately win and like take a shower and go to their interviews, which is kind of like the movie glosses over it. In the books, they're like in the hospital for a number of days, or like not necessarily the hospital, but like capital treatment for a number of days, basically undoing any of the injuries that they got during the games. And so Katniss wakes up and she's like shocked that she's connected to an IV drip. And she's like shocked that she can hear in both ears again because she thought for sure she'd be deaf the whole time.
Yeah.
And she like looks at her body for scars, and like all of her scars have disappeared. And then Haymitch even says, you need to be happy because they wanted to give you like breast augmentation, and I told them to leave you alone.
Yes.
It's so messed up.
I was like, they were gonna augment her breast. Like, Jesus.
Without consent. Like, it's so nuts. Yeah.
Because and that's another part. You belong to the Capitol. You are what the Capitol wants you to be. And they wanted her to be this beautiful heroine that everybody's in love with, and that means bigger titties.
Bigger titties, because everybody loves titties. Yeah. And like, I mix up the book and the movie ending a little bit in my brain. Does it end with them on the train, just like headed home in the book?
Yeah.
Yeah, right?
Yeah, they're pretty much the same. Can I tell you this is one of my favorite stories about my mom. So my mom had not read the books, but she saw the commercials and she liked Jennifer Lawrence and she like really wanted to go see these movies. And I'm like, yeah. And she's like, oh, I thought you were going to go see them with your friends. I'm like, no, me and you'll go see it. So I take her to see the movie, and I'm like into it because I had read the book. And she's just into it because she thinks it's a good movie. And it gets to the ending, and I was expecting this because I had read the book, and she had not read the book. And it ends like on that odd, weird cliffhanger of them just like going back home. And my mother literally stands up in the theater and says, well, that's a fucked up ending.
I mean, you're not wrong, Mama.
That's what I like. That's amazing. I love your mom. Well, I say, like, when the book ended, when I read it the first time, I was like, well, I was so underwhelmed. I didn't really love it. And I'm like, but do I care about what happens enough next? And I was like, yeah, I guess I do. And I kept reading.
I'm the kind of asshole where I gotta finish a book series regardless of how bad I think it is. So once I got to the end of this one, I'm like, well, I didn't love the ending, but we'll see what happens in number 2 because I gotta get to the end.
Yeah.
God bless you for that, because if I read the first book and I don't like it, I am not moving on.
I gotta know.
So overall, I thought this reread was great. Like, I thought this book was so much better than I read when I read it the first time. And I still think that this movie, while we have our issues with it, overall I think did a really good job of adapting this story. While the movie's not as dark as the books, the story I think is there. The characters are there, and I enjoy everything about it. I think it's one of the better adaptations of book to movie.
Same. I was gonna say, I don't feel like Hunger Games the way that I felt about Twilight, when I immediately was like, I wish they would readapt it because the movies, while we love them, are like not good adaptation, blah, blah, blah. No, I don't want them to touch the Hunger Games. I feel like the movie series really captured the books very well. Really liked it. There are differences, and if I had a magic wand and could go back and do things differently, yes, I would. But I enjoy what we have both in book and on screen.
And Keiki, what about you for reading it through the first time after watching the movies first? Overall thoughts?
I loved it. I went through this book like at lightning speed. And I was like, yo, you need to chill out because you need to like talk about this. So you need to make notes. But I was just like, this is so different. Like, what's happening?
I will say I finished this one way ahead of our schedule because there was one night, and I've read it before, so I know what's going to happen. But there was one night where I was like, man, I should put this book down. And I was like, no, because I'm not that far from you.
Yeah. Once I got to that part one, the end of part one, I just like hopped straight into the games. And I had to tell myself like to chill because I was like, whoa, you have to talk about this book, But it was just these small changes in this whole different world that my mind was imagining. I was just like really eager to see what was going to keep happening. And because I had seen the movies and, I know how it ends, I got to the end of this book and I had to stop myself from starting Catching Fire because that's what I wanted to do. But I was like, we need to talk about this first. So I'm not letting that book pollute.
I was actually, before we started recording, I was actually so excited because I was like, oh my God, if we record tonight, that means I can also start Catching Fire before I go to bed.
Because I like the movies and Catching Fire was my favorite movie. So I'm hoping maybe it'll be my favorite book and that I'm going to learn a lot of things about people and just lose my mind like I did reading this book all over again because it's pretty good.
We get Finnick. Finnick is coming.
I'm going to just say right now, the hill that I will die on about Catching Fire is that Justin Williams should have been cast as Finnick.
Justin Williams? Oh, Jesse Williams. I was like, Justin Williams.
I know, but how? Because they're supposed to be. Oh, no, because that's right. It's like the 75th is like a hodgepodge of people who are older and younger,
Go back and read
so
it,
it totally could have been Jesse Williams. You're right.
Uh-huh. Mm-hmm.
Well, let's see. We're going to have to recast everyone because I'm reading it for the first time. So we're going to see what my mind thinks.
I love it.
And if I actually care about these characters, because I can tell you in Catching Fire, everyone was ancillary to me except for the guy who did all the tech stuff.
Oh, Beatty.
And that's what, we'll get there. But I do think that if they were going to split a movie into multiple parts, I do think Catching Fire should have been 2 movies. But that's just me. I'll get over it.
So we'll see. Maybe we'll split the book into 2 parts. We'll get to reading and we'll decide. But thank you, ladies, for talking about this book series with me because I'm so stoked for the new movie that's coming out, and I haven't read that book yet.
Me too.
So, like, this is forcing me to do reread and then read that. I'm excited about it.
That boy who's playing young Snow, and I go, oh my God, why did I sound like an old woman when I started that sentence? The young man playing young President Snow is very attractive, and I feel bad because he turns into President Snow.
I know, but he's such good casting for a young Donald Sutherland.
Oh,
it's so good. Is there anything else either of you want to say? Otherwise, we're gonna sign off.
Fuck the Capitol. I'm out. No, I'm just kidding.
13-12.
Amazing. Well, we will be back next month with Catching Fire and our thoughts. It might be 1 part, it might be 2 parts. We'll see what happens. Until next time, interact with us on social media. We always reply. smellsliketeenagemail@gmail.com. We're here for you. So until next time.
Bye.
Bye.